Imagine the best wedding you've ever been to. Maybe it was your own. There was probably excitement, love, and joy. And there was celebration. And most of all, there would have been hope. I remember my first marriage when I was just 23, way back in 1995. I wish someone told me then that 30 to 40% of marriages actually don't last according to the CDC. Divorce and separation rates around the world are higher now than they've ever been. My name is Hadley Barrett and I'm a nurse practitioner and a sexologist. What's a sexologist? Most people think of Barbara Streisand in the movie Meet the Fockers, but that's a Hollywood version. In real life, a sexologist is someone who studies the science of sex and assists patients with the skills and treatments of dysfunction. Over the past 28 years, I've had the privilege of being trusted with the most intimate thoughts and fears of thousands of men. But more than that, I know firsthand how it feels to be married for 13 years and it not ending in the fairy tale that I had imagined. This explains my double-barreled surname, 2 husbands, 2 names. I don't plan on getting a third. This is why I'm so passionate today to be talking to you about what I've learnt about men, relationships and sex. I want to dismantle what I believe is societal misconceptions about what men truly desire in their relationships and improve connections. According to an article published in the National Institute of Health in 2020, people in great relationships statistically live longer, and not only that, they're happier in other areas of their life. I believe that men are misunderstood and misjudged. Toxic masculinity is a term that is used way too freely. It's confusing to be a man today. If they are vulnerable and share their hopes, dreams and anxieties, it's seen as a weakness. But if they express their strength, love, power and decisiveness, they're toxic. Men are scared of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, so they often hold back. As a woman, I know this is a controversial thing for me to say, and not everybody will agree, and that's okay. The aim today is to think about a new perspective, and the goal is to empower all genders to navigate relationships with greater empathy, understanding and compassion. Because we know what we're doing isn't working. Divorce rates are increasing and 30% of the world's population say that they're lonely, according to an article published this year in 2024 on Statistica. What do you think the #1 indicator of whether a couple will survive or crumble is? You may know of Dr. John Gottman as the guy who predicts divorce with over 90% accuracy. His research with thousands of couples has shown that negative communication patterns are the #1 predictor of divorce. So if we can master hard conversations with our partners without feeling criticised, we are on our way to success. Let me tell you a story about John. He's a very macho bloke. He owns a mechanical workshop that deals with high performance vehicles. He's in his 50s and he's recently been diagnosed with prostate cancer. His wife Jane is in her early 40s. John was referred to me by his urologist, and at our first consult he struggled to even make eye contact. He looked at the ground, he appeared to be mortified at the questions I was asking. I explained what to expect and that the side effects of prostate cancer surgery, such as impotence and incontinence, can resolve with time and a rehabilitation program. It's important to note that this man made his entire living of making cars perform better, faster and go harder. He put a lot of value on the performance. So the idea of being impotent was particularly disconcerting. A prostate cancer diagnosis is unnerving for most men, but for a rough, tough, macho male, the possible side effects of the treatment were unfathomable. About 20 minutes into this consult, and a few busted myths, he relaxed and started talking, and so did Jane. They both said their sex life was good and important to them, but they'd never spoken about it before. They just took it for granted that it all worked. They'd never even had a conversation with each other about sex at all. This is not unusual. In my experience, many couples who have been married for 20, 40, 50 years have never spoken about their intimate relationship. John is now 6 months post-surgery and has commenced a penile rehabilitation program. And he is, with a bit of creativity and assistance, able to be sexually active with his partner. Now this is great news. But the best thing is, last week when I was talking to him on the phone, he said, "You know, Melissa, having this problem has been amazing for our relationship." "How so?" I asked. John said, "Well, we've always had a good sex life and we've always been really close. But I thought this has brought us even closer because it's the first time ever we've actually talked about sex. With your help, we've fumbled our way through. It's like we're teenagers again. and we've found a new way to be intimate with each other and give pleasure. We've discovered new things about each other's desires and fantasies that we would never have known if we hadn't been forced to have these difficult conversations. He gave me this example. He said that his wife had always wanted to try a sex toy, but she'd never told him because she felt embarrassed and she didn't want him to feel inadequate. The fact that following his treatment, he didn't have the same function as before, surgery, meant that they had to mix up their sexual script and try new things. They both said that the silver lining to his cancer diagnosis was that they had had honest, hard conversations which made them feel closer and more connected than they ever had in their 20 years of marriage. Their story is not unique. There are a lot of couples who struggle with having hard conversations, myself included, and I talk about sex all day long with other people, but I still struggle to bring these issues up at home. Are there times when I want to shoot through or bail, which is Aussie slang for leave the conversation? Yes, of course there are. But on the other side of these hard conversations, we both get to have what we truly desire and feel more connected. This brings me to another type of hard. So to the men in the room, when's the worst time to have an erection? I want you to think about it. Is it at a dinner party? Is it in the middle of a big meeting? Or is it when you're at the gym? What's the worst time? And ladies, have you ever felt pressure to perform sexually? And if yes, does this make you feel resentful, angry, frustrated and feeling harassed? The question I want you to think about is, are they pressuring me? Are they wanting sex? Or is it just me buying into this stereotypical view of masculinity that hinders relationships? I call these the man myths. This was the case with one of my first ever clients, me. Myth number 1, all men want to satisfy their carnal feelings, or as they say in Australia, get their rocks off. I'd often climb into bed after being up to a crying, fretful baby, and the father of my children would cuddle up to me, and I'd feel something sticking into my back. And I'd think, play dead. And then I'd think, you selfish pig, don't you know I've been awake for hours? And the last thing I feel like is sex? I remember feeling this like it was yesterday, and my oldest child is now 26. The fact that my ex-husband was just a healthy male and his body was doing exactly what it was supposed to do when he was in sleep was completely unknown to me until I did postgraduate studies in sexology. Healthy men have 3 to 5 erections every night when they're in REM sleep. This is the body's way of keeping the penis fit, flexible, and it prevents the smooth muscle from shrinking. The penis is one of the few body parts that exercises itself while we're sleeping, which proves to me that if God created man, then he definitely is a penis owner. Imagine all the resentment, anger, and frustration that could have been avoided if only I'd known this simple fact. And this isn't the only myth there is. Let's talk about myth number 2. So many people think that erectile dysfunction is weird or abnormal. But did you know that 1 in 5 men over 40, 1 in 3 over 50, and 1 in 2 over 60 actually have erectile dysfunction? In my experience as a sexologist, I often have middle-aged women come into me and say, my partner stopped approaching me. He doesn't want to be intimate with me anymore. I think he may be having an affair. Or maybe I'm just old, ugly, and unattractive to him nowadays. The reality is, when I speak to the male counterpart of that very same partnership, they'll say they've been having troubles with their erections, but they're too embarrassed to ask and discuss it with their wife and ask their GP for help. It's completely normal for men to lose some of their sexual function as they age, and they often need help. The problem is men just don't talk about it. I can never think of a time when I've shared those statistics with a man in my clinic and he hasn't said something along the lines of, I had no idea, I thought I was the only one. Imagine if this was public knowledge. Men wouldn't have to feel embarrassment and shame. They wouldn't have to feel they were losing their masculinity, and they'd be more likely to seek help and discuss the issue with their partners and friends. The female counterpart wouldn't jump to conclusions that their husband was having an affair or didn't love them anymore. Erectile dysfunction is easy to treat, and there are many different options. But unless we're all comfortable talking about this and having hard conversations, it remains the elephant in the room and often the cause of relationship breakdowns and depression. I could go on and on about all the different myths there are, from sexual disruption to what age people stop being horny, but I would be here for days. If there's one thing I want you to remember, is that all of these issues can be solved by having conversations and being open to different ideas about masculinity. The issue that is causing the problem or the friction might just be a normal part of their biology. Speaking of biology, why do men cheat? Most people think it's because they're looking for a thrill, they're bored, they're not getting enough sex at home, or it's just what men do. But I believe most men cheat because they're lonely. And it's not just men that are lonely. There are many definitions of loneliness, but for the purpose of today, loneliness is the feeling of disconnectedness or isolation. It's a state of mind, a perception of being alone. In fact, 1 in 3 people are lonely. Look to the person to your left and then look to the person to your right. Statistically, one of you is feeling lonely. So what has loneliness got to do with infidelity? I can best explain with a story. Loneliness is a feeling of disconnectedness or isolation. It's a state of mind, a perception of being alone. In fact, 1 in 3 people are lonely. So look at the person to your left and then look at the person to your right. Statistically, one of you is feeling lonely. So what has loneliness got to do with infidelity? I can best explain with a story. I will never forget Roger. He'd been married for 3 decades. He came in just after he was diagnosed with prostate cancer and told me that his sexual function was so important to him, so much so that he had considered not having treatment for the cancer. He came alone, even though he'd been married for 30 years. I asked him how his sexual relationship was with his wife, because so often I see men who are really sad because they're not intimate with their partner anymore. He said, "Oh, I have sex with my wife all the time," and then he hesitated. As the conversation progressed, he said, "Can I talk to you about something highly confidential?" And then he unloaded. He said he had a good family life with his wife, a good business relationship and regular sex, but there'd always been something missing. He went on to say that over the course of this 30-year marriage, he'd been in 3 long-term relationships with other women. I asked him why, and he said his wife enjoyed sex but not intimacy. She didn't like to hold hands, kiss, cuddle, or talk about personal feelings. He was obviously ashamed of his infidelity, but he just couldn't live his life without the intimacy. So he found a way to work it around. That, whilst not perfect, it worked for him, and probably for the other women too. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to sit in judgment, but because Roger is an extreme example of the many men that have divulged their affairs to me, and the common thread is always loneliness for intimate connection. So, if you only take one thing away from this talk, remember that men are complex, more complex than society gives them credit for, and ask yourself this question when your relationship becomes difficult. How is this person, my lover, trying to call for help? How are they trying to combat their loneliness, consciously or unconsciously? I propose that instead of seeing masculinity as toxic, we see it as a superpower where strength, decisiveness, potency intermingle with respect, vulnerability, empathy, and compassion. Let us see if this view could make our relationships, ultimately the world, a better place where young men are not scared to be masculine. Let's have hard conversations and bust the man myths. Thank you for listening.